to make this core server a part of the domain, we first need to verify a couple of things. One is we want to make sure that the computer name is exactly what we want it to be or appear to be in the network. So I'm happy with this name, SRVR 2019 Core. The next thing is I have to make sure that the DNS is correct. So the DNS on our domain controller is set at 192.168.100.100, and I can verify that by going to having a look at the IP address here. Okay, so the DNS on my domain controller is 192.168.100.100. This is the DNS server that we configured, and it's running on our domain controller. So any computer that will be joining this domain will have to have the same IP address as the DNS address, because this is how the computer is will contact our domain controller. Remember, the purpose of the DNS is to resolve a name to an IP address, or to map a name to the IP address of our server. So in order for our computer to contact this domain controller and to join the domain, it must be able to reach our DNS server to provide that mapping. That's the only way it's going to work. If the DNS is not correct, there's no way that we can actually join the domain. So that's the first thing that we need to ensure that it's correct. Now let's go back to our core server and have a look at the DNS numbers. So we can, if we need to check our network settings, we can just go to 8, and here the IP address is 10.0.2.20. Select network 1, and it doesn't seem like a DNS server is configured, so we need now to go and configure our DNS server. Okay, so the IP address, we need to change that. The gateway, I'm not too concerned about. I'm going to remove the gateway, but this server is currently in the incorrect subnet, so I need to change that to match that of the domain controller that I'm going to attach this computer to. So in order to set the network address, I'm going to go ahead and select number 1, and it'll be a static address. So currently I have I'm assigning a static IP address, so I need to change that. I'll make it 192.168.100.say101. Subnet mask, I'll leave it as it is. Gateway, I don't need a gateway. And now I'll go ahead and change the DNS server. So I'll select 2, and preferred DNS is 192.168.100.100. Okay, have to make it the same as what's on our server. Preferred DNS set. And alternate DNS. This is if you have multiple DNS servers on the network. It's very common to have more than one DNS server on our network. In this case, we don't have any, so we'll just leave that blank. So now my IP address has changed. So I want to see if I can actually communicate with my domain controller. And what I can do is just send a ping. So I'm going to go ahead and exit from here. Exit the command line. Now, let's go ahead and ping our server. And this is our domain controller, and that's 192.168.100.100. If I'm unable to ping this ping this address, or if I'm unable to send a communication to my DNS server, which also happens to be my domain controller, then I know that there's something wrong. So I have to get communication between the two of them in order to be able to join the network. So if you send a ping and you're not getting a reply, then you need to go and check to see where the issue is coming from. Okay, we need to resolve this before we can actually go to our next phase or next step of joining this domain. So go back to server config, and we're going to go ahead and join our domain now. Now the first option that we see here is option 1, which is domain or workgroup. So currently we are in a workgroup, and we need to move that now from the workgroup or from a standalone machine into our domain. Now, how do we join that? Select option 1, and it asks us to join a domain or workgroup. In order to join a domain, you have to type D, the letter D. Okay, it tells you the bottom here. Now, in order to join a domain, just type D, and here it asks you for the name of the domain. So my domain, it's called lab, and I can verify that because that's what it is. You can either enter the just lab, the first part of the domain, or you can enter the full name, lab.local. Like that. So we want to join this domain that's called lab. And now it asks for the username in order to a user account with privileges that will allow us to join this domain. So I'm going to go ahead and just use the administrator account. So I have to first put the name of the domain, because that's what it's telling me to do here. Name of domain, / then user account. Spell it incorrectly. So administrator, okay, that's our that's the account that I'm going to use. That's the highest level of account that is available. So I'm sure this account will have the required permissions to join this domain. And now I'm going to have to enter the password for that admin account. So what it's doing in the background here is verifying that the information that I put in is correct. So it is going to look for the domain. It's going to look for the domain controller. It will verify the account that I used to join the domain, which is administrator, and my password. If the administrator password or the account that I'm using to join the domain does not have the rights to allow me to join the domain, it will just give me an error saying that, well, I don't have the account that I'm using does not have the appropriate privileges to join it, and it will reject the option of joining this domain. It will not go to the next stage, which is what we are seeing in the screen here. So now that it's verified and the account has been verified with the appropriate privileges, it's asked me if I want to change the computer name before restarting the computer. I don't want to change the name because I'm happy with the name that I have, and I can say no to this. And now it's telling me that I need to restart the computer in order for the changes to be applied. And do I want to restart? I say yes. So the computer is just going to go ahead and restart there. Now, I have the computer restarted. I'm going to go ahead and log in. Okay. Go back to sconfig and let's see what happens. Now look at the change. You see, before we actually joined the domain, the workgroup name was just called workgroup. Now that after joining the domain and restarting the computer, we can see now that it has changed from workgroup to now domain. So our domain that we are a member of or a part of is lab.local. Okay, so that's how we connect a ServerCore machine or a ServerCore installation to our domain. Now let's go over to our Active Directory and see if this computer has been registered as a computer in Active Directory. And let's have a look at the DNS to see if it record or created an A record that will match this computer name, the new computer that we just added, which is our core server, to the IP address of 192.168.100.101. So this is our domain controller. Let's open up Active Directory. So I'm going to go to Active Directory users and computers. And I should now see my computer here. So this is the ServerCore. It's now registered as a computer in the computer folder. So we can now move this server if you want to anyone. Say for example, if we have an organizational unit that was created that we'll actually connect or locate all our servers, this computer can now be moved from this location. This is the default location. Any computer that is added in Active Directory, by default it actually stores it in the computer's folder, but that's not an organizational unit. So if we need to move this to a specific organizational unit where we'll apply policies, then we can go ahead and move that. But I'm just going to leave it here for now. I don't need to move it. The next thing that I want to check is the DNS to see if an entry has been created in our DNS, and that entry I'm looking for an A record. So here's our DNS. Let's go to the DNS manager. And we look in the forward lookup zone under the our domain name there. And now we can see that we have the ServerCore has been added as the most recent entry in our DNS. Okay, so we can see that the ServerCore has now been registered with an A record, which is mapping the name Server 2019 Core to the address that we assign to our server. Okay, so that's how you add or make a ServerCore a member of a domain.